Welcome to Direct Supply's educational webinar sponsored by Argentum. The topic for today is effectively navigating the tsunami of innovation and technology coming to senior living. My name is Savannah Romans, and I will be facilitating today's meeting. Please note, the information contained in this presentation is intended to provide general information, but not advice about certain regulations and initiatives. This is not intended as legal or other advice, and each situation may vary depending on the particular facts and circumstances. You should not act upon this information without first consulting with qualified legal counsel. Today's webinar will be presented by Gaurie, Rodman, and Justin Smith. Gaurie is the Director of Development Services at Direct Supply Aptura, an innovative firm that supports senior living renovation, construction, and new development projects from start to finish. In this role, Gaurie has developed a comprehensive development services offering that saw triple-digit growth in its first year. She also leads a cross-functional team that continually innovates and delivers Aptura's strategic planning, development management, and design build services to the client base, including market assessments and studies, development consulting, and branding. Gaurie approaches senior living real estate development using her background of planning and architecture, which provides a unique perspective on delivering successful building projects. Prior to joining Direct Supply, Gaurie served as Vice President of Design and Construction at Eargen's Development Partners, Assistant Professor at the Milwaukee School of Engineering, and co-owner of Coach House Development Partners. Now at Direct Supply, Aptura, Gaurie's vision is to create senior living communities that function extraordinarily, are fiscally sound, and allow caregivers to meet resident needs in timely, respectful, and caring manners. Justin Smith is an engineer and manager of the Innovation and Technology Group at the Direct Supply Innovation and Technology Center at the Milwaukee School of Engineering. Justin started his career in development at GE Healthcare, working in design, usability, and validation of new medical devices. Justin leads the innovation and advanced technology programs, including a focus on emerging healthcare tech, including medical IoT, AI, computer vision, and voice control applications within the industry. He also works with technology startups across the United States and overseas to develop and test their products and move them to alpha and beta pilots with healthcare customers. Justin holds a Bachelor's of Science in Electrical and Computer Engineering from Marquette University. Now please welcome Gaurie and Justin.
Thank you so much, Savannah. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Justin and I are really excited to talk to you about the entire concept of innovation and technology and where that's going, but really trying to understand how do you as operators and designers and investors in the industry navigate making good decisions and investment decisions that impact operations and the quality of life for your seniors in a way that makes sense. So we'll walk you through kind of our strategy and our thought process, and hopefully it'll give you kind of a plan of how to move forward navigating innovation technology that suits your purposes. So we can get started with what we'd like to do is really take a look at what is driving innovation and technology in the industry. We know there's a lot of innovation technology going on. Historically, as in the last 4 to 5 years, as we've looked out into the future of the industry, we've really taken a look at the 4 pillars that are driving transformation in the industry. Number 1 is demographics. We've been hearing about this forever, and a lifetime that is not changing. You know, the boomers are coming, the staff challenges that's going to cause, all of those are still going to impact seniors housing and how we approach seniors housing. Number 2, driven a little bit about the characteristics of that demographics, is the notion of consumerism and the shift from a market segment and a consumer group that really was like, take care of me and that's where I am, to a consumer-driven industry need. And so we like to coin it as in a way of saying we're no longer asking people what is the matter with them, but we're asking people what matters to them. That consumer notion is very subtle, but very, very important for us to understand as we create environments to meet the needs of our residents and our operators, right? The third thing that's driving innovation and is really the economics of our industry, which is quickly transforming. in some sense because of demographics and the sheer mass of people that are coming to us, but also the profile of the population coming to us, what they can afford, what age they're going to come to our communities at, what health condition they're going to come to us at, all drive the economics of the industry. And we do know that those kept getting squeezed and squeezed. And so we are going to have to find ways to bring quality of living and care to seniors in a cost-effective manner. So innovation is going to be critical. And then the fourth pillar driving transformation is really technology. Technology, as we see across all of our lives, are going to be inherent in how seniors live within our communities and how we serve their needs. In the last year, 2020, has really, nothing about the fundamentals have really transformed, but there is a significant focus and need for healthcare. So the art of it for all of us moving forward is to balance the needs of the four trends that are driving innovation, but really recognize that healthcare is going to play a critical part of the consideration for everyone in this industry. And that's where innovation technology will become a huge playing factor. So coming into this, really, we looked at consumer technology and we looked at healthcare technology and everything that's growing and transforming at a really fast pace, as you see in all of these different trends. And how do we pull those pieces together? How do we create a care model that really uses technology in a way that allows us to still have a really impactful living method? So in the last year, what has happened along with that technology care model, if you go to the next slide, these new priorities came into play: infection control, our staff, how we look after them, the need for isolation in a pandemic situation. That landscape has really changed how our consumers are going to look at it and how residents are going to look at it. And so I think that for anyone today looking at navigating innovation and technology, we need to look at the backdrop of all of these trends and things that have happened in the last 24 months, 12 months to 24 months. So if you look at how we look at technology and how do we align technology to make sense in our operating environment, there are really kind of three big buckets that we look at, right? The idea of using technology to create connected care and lifestyle models. People are desiring and wanting to live a purposeful life, regardless of age or frailty. And technology can allow us to do that. Many people are already doing that. The pandemic has brought that to the surface. So that is going to be a driving force in transformation for us. The second thing is artificial intelligence. And Justin will talk about a couple of new technologies that are emerging that we're seeing that allow us to make much better, more informed, on-time decisions. And that's going to have a significant impact on how we embrace technology and innovation. And the third thing is, if you think about the idea of the economics that are going to be impacting us, we cannot be everything to everybody. So we're going to have to, as an industry, look at partnerships. It'll allow us to do two things. On one side, it will allow us to bring more opportunities for fulfilled lives for our seniors, but also allow us to do things more effectively if done correctly. So we'll take a look at how we plan for those elements. So how do you begin preparing for innovation technology? We always, as planners within drug supply and Aptura, when we're talking about projects with our clients, we begin with saying, you individually as operator and investors in this industry, you need to know who you are. You need to know what your value proposition to the marketplace is. You need to understand what the residents, the healthcare system, the investors, what do they all want from you and how are you going to serve them? And then you need to think about what are the challenges to that proposition. Is the idea is that innovation and technology should be supplementing and enhancing what you do for those folks from where you start from. That then know who you are is really about who you serve, right? So really understanding what are the family's expectations. The expectations from an urban family with a senior versus a rural or suburban family is probably going to be very different. So if you're an operator looking at different innovations and technology, you need to understand what's going to resonate, not only with those seniors, but also with the staff members that are going to come and work for you. And how are you going to make good decisions if you don't have your hand on exactly what these expectations are? So understanding family and the residents, the staff and their outcome, because you want to be able to have the right kind of technology in there. And then third, once you have all of those pieces together, you need to understand what the backbone or the infrastructure that you have in place is. What are the systems that are available? How do those technology systems actually integrate with your operating model? Take a look at your workflows, find places where you can enhance them. Then when new technologies and opportunities come, you have a baseline to make those decisions as to whether they're good investments or not.
All right. Thank you, Gaurie. I'm going to try to give you guys a quick overview of some of the kind of macro trends that we're seeing, a quick understanding of what these mean and some examples. And then we'll do a kind of deeper dive later in the presentation. So I think the big four that we're seeing right now are really this whole idea of Internet of Things, which is really this idea of machines talking to machines. So whether that's going to be sensors within the building or it's just the general connectivity of systems that hasn't existed historically, and how is this kind of flow of information going to allow us to do different things? Artificial intelligence, which is really this idea of letting a computer do some of the decision making. And even from decision making, maybe it's just calculating data. The whole idea behind artificial intelligence is there's only so much that one person can do. And so how can we get a multiplier effect by bringing technology in to help us kind of mine through the piles and piles of data that we're going to be getting? Smart buildings, and this is something that's certainly kind of a blend of the two above. And so, how are we bringing technology into the buildings themselves that helps not only the operation of the building, but also the folks that are within that building? And then finally, connectivity, which, the network within your buildings is obviously going to be a larger and larger backbone to everything else that happens in the future. So when we think about Internet of Things, there's a couple ways to look at it. So this first view is really thinking about how we're putting connected devices within the space that are focused on the space itself. So things like, network and Wi-Fi, which is a kind of a core infrastructure that's there. Digital signage. So how do you communicate your message throughout the facility in a consistent and effective manner? Electric door hardware, theater and AV, notifications, all of these pieces that are fundamentally part of the infrastructure of the building that really helps in the operation of that building. The other side to focus on is really the kind of resident engagement side of this. And so how are we using technology within the building and this connected technology to know more about what's happening within the building? So things like real-time location services. I can know where my staff is or where my residents may be at any given point in time. Certainly with COVID being a focus, resident engagement has become an even larger focus. So at times where you have residents who may be stuck within, their apartment or don't have the ability to have those friends and family members come in, how can we use technology to ensure that engagement is still high? As well as things like, ADL tracking wearables. There's all sorts of stuff that's coming out that's ultimately giving us more and more information about the health and well-being of the residents within our buildings. And so how can we look at these and how can we actually operate the building differently, even design the building differently based off of the technologies that are available? Artificial intelligence, always a super easy one to walk through. So as we think about artificial intelligence, like I said, I think that the focus is we're having more and more information coming through. So as we think about those ADL wearables, as we think about the real-time location services, there's more and more information at the hands of clinical staff, operations staff, just about everybody. And we can't just expect to put that in front of them and for them to take all these different flows of information and be able to make sense out of them in a timely manner. So by using artificial intelligence, so let's say it's that real-time location services, instead of having to worry about having one person within the facility monitoring the location of everybody within that facility and looking for something that's off, we can actually use artificial intelligence to do that. And if, let's say, a certain resident who is a wander risk all of a sudden gets a little near to a door, hey, we can have immediate event response. The system can send notifications, can allow people to know exactly what's going on, and you can respond in a timely manner. Obviously, the other part of this is cost savings. You don't necessarily have to bring in additional people to look at all of this information. A lot of what we're seeing is not that artificial intelligence is being used for decision making, as much as it's being used to put the right information in front of the decision makers, so that they can make those timely responses. And then in general, I think we just look at increased marketability of people want to come into a community where they feel safe, and the application of technology within that community in the right ways can bring that sense of safety. I think especially as we're kind of coming out of a COVID world, that's going to be a very vocal population coming into our communities on what they want to see and how they want to feel when they're inside those doors. And so the final one is really this idea of smarter buildings. And this is where we can really focus on maybe workflow efficiencies within the building, or just general things like energy savings, cost savings. So we look at systems that I'll use lighting for an example. Looking at systems around smart lighting, where we turn lights off where we don't need them, or we turn lights on automatically when someone enters a space, or even inside the residence. If a resident gets out of bed at night, we automatically illuminate a pathway to the bathroom or something like that. And so how can we use some of these infrastructure pieces within the building itself to help make that building safer, as well as just reduce the overall cost to operate that building? I think things like the flexibility piece of really allowing your building to be what it needs to be at any given point in time. Remote reporting, remote operations. So, that ability of, how many of us now have Ring doorbells at home, or other things, or smart thermostats, where no matter where we are in the world, we can check on how things are going. I think this same idea for your operations staff. I don't necessarily have to be in the building. I can go and I can see the state of that building at any given point in time. And in general, just improved reliability. So the more information you get about that, and the similar to the clinical side, the better information is relayed to the people that are decision makers, the easier you can respond to things, and the overall reliability of your infrastructure and your building should actually improve with that. So I'm going to pass it back over to Gaurie to talk about some of the elements that are enabling technology within the buildings.
So I love hearing Justin talk about all of the innovations and the technology components of it. As architect and planner, then the question that comes to our team is to really begin to look at how do we enable and allow for that innovation to actually be adapted into your building. So number one, we have to look at the infrastructure, right? The rooms that we need in order to have the technology there, the conduits to distribute the technology through there. What is that infrastructure? Have we planned for them appropriately? Because without our even recognizing it, there are conditions in which the existing facility actually impedes the embracement of some of the technologies that are out there. Second one, wireless. As we all know, anyone that has a cell phone, that is constantly changing and improving. So what is the system and how do we manage that? So ensuring that we have the capability and the capacity to have state-of-the-art wireless becomes really important. Digital electricity, that's an emerging technology, and it is something that has the potential to save time and money pretty significantly. So that is something that is probably going to be playing a bigger role as we move forward. And then finally, remote connectivity. All of this really works with the idea of our ability to connect remotely. And if nothing else, COVID-19 in the past 9 months has taught us that remote connectivity is going to be very, very important for everybody to establish a sense of safety for themselves, right? That's what's really happened in this time of remoteness, the ability to still connect. So we're going to have to pay attention to ensure that our buildings and our communities actually have these systems in place so that we can embrace the innovation and technology coming to us. So what are the considerations as we think about that infrastructure that's needed for us to take on innovation technology. Understand and have a really clear notion of who's going to own the technology. Are you going to purchase it? Are you going to lease it? Are you going to have agreements? As an organization, how do you handle that? That has to be a decision that gets made, because that is foundational to how you grow and adapt to what's changing for you. Once you have this technology, you really have to pay attention to cybersecurity, right? It's going to become more and more important to us as we get more and more people on our system. So if you think about a wireless system or remote connectivity system that has healthcare information being transformed on one and social connections going on the other, we need to ensure that the firewalls are there, that our networks are up and operational, and that they have the capacity and the capability to do what they need to do very safely. So cybersecurity and policies that, and the next one around cybersecurity is to ensure that you have the policies in place to monitor and the ground rules for how everything gets used. One of the things that we found is that those organizations that have really good sound policies that are adapted and known by everybody, not only the staff members, but also the residents and their families, everyone feels a little bit safer because they know the rules by which they're playing in this kind of fast moving and changing environment of technology and communication. And the final part of consideration is the idea of selecting the right mix, right? Because at the end of the day, it's very unlikely that you can get the best of everything. You're going to have to make some compromises. And when I started, I talked about really knowing who you are and who you serve. This is where knowing that will allow you to make really good selections about what your short-term and long-term needs are, and how do you make decisions that allow you to meet today's need, but have the capacity to go into the future. And on this, looking at some of the stuff that Justin's going to talk about next, you're going to get very excited about things that are coming down the pipeline. And what we really want you to know is how do you set yourself up to be successful to adapt to those. So when we think about technology and we think about technology design, we see the entire gamut of how people approach technology design, right? So if you go down the line, first of all, in many cases, we find incidences where there really is no technology design contract at all, which means that when you're designing a new building or renovating an existing building, there's rarely space set aside or understanding of the infrastructure needed for the technology that's going to be coming in the future, because the technology component is almost looked at as an add-on in the back end. It has to be done front end. Then we have the scenario where the team will go, the client will go and ask the electrical engineer to design the technology package. That's not their specialty, and in many cases, our electrical engineers are not specialized in seniors living and all of the nuances of what that brings to the table. So that eventually will curtail the options you have and the impact on the residents and staff. The third way that we see it is that technology design is really, as the last moment you go and you say, you know what, I need water management, go to a vendor and buy it and place it. Not to say that you will not get a really good option, but you're probably leaving opportunity on the table, right? Because if we talk about an integrated system or system that can do more than one thing, you really want to make sure that you understand your entire system, and then you go to the vendors rather than having the vendor design for you singularly to what they're pulling together. So the integration component gets lost. And the last and probably the worst scenario is when we go to a contractor and you say, you know what, figure it out, I need a technology package. At that point, there is just so much ambiguity that we're causing a lot of problems and also costing us present time and long-term dollars. The optimal way is to really, when you start planning your building and before you even put the first pen to pencil, sitting down with the operations team and looking at operationally what you want your building to do and how you want to do it, and then articulating that to your entire design team. When we approach projects, we try to get the entire design team. And when I say entire, it's the architecture, MEP, structural, but especially in seniors housing, interior design, food service, everything that touches our residents and our staff members, and technology design have to be at the table from the very beginning, because the decisions you made around what technology can do to make you more efficient is going to have an impact and potential savings in the building layout. And so having all those team members on together from the very beginning, to us, is the optimal way to approach designing a renovation or a new construction project. So Justin, are you going to get us going now?
I am.
Excellent.
So we've talked a lot about, what are some of the things to think about when we're early on in the process. What I'm going to go through now is a little bit of insight into how we're thinking about the future, give you some examples of products that are, some are far out there, and some are here on the doorstep today. And so, first off, I just want to give a little bit of overview. So, I work in our Innovation and Technology Center. Our focus is really on bridging the gap between all these different groups that we work with. The one that isn't called out in this slide is ultimately our customers. So we bring in a normal year, we bring hundreds of customers to Milwaukee. We are talking through what are the problems that they face, what are the gaps that they see within their organizations, and where are the opportunities that we can help them to solve those problems. And so what we do internally is we focus on really this building of relationships. And so we have relationships with university partners really all over the US that are focused on the research side of things. So we get an understanding of where the research is pointing us. And this is typically stuff that's probably years out. But we can start thinking about, these are some of the things that people are working on, and these are some of the things that we'll be able to design around in the senior living community of the future. There's also the startup side of this. And if you would have asked us, 10 years ago, how many startups were focusing on senior health, we could probably count them on one hand. Now, we're aware of, I think, almost 5,000 different startups that are out there focusing on senior health in one form or fashion. And over the past few years, we've vetted almost half of them, 2,500 plus. And the goal of this is not necessarily that we're not investing in startups, but we want to know who's out there working on problems, so that ultimately when our customers come to us and say, hey, this is a gap that we're facing and this is a problem set that we're trying to solve, we can bring in the right people. And whether that's internal to direct supply, whether that's startup partners that we're working with, or it's that research side of saying, hey, there's nothing there yet. Let's connect with the researchers and let's really try to kind of vet this problem so that everybody's on the same page as we move forward. So one of the things that really came out in this past year, and we saw that when the focus on healthcare came out, was really this focus on safety. And so as we looked at the impact that COVID had for our customers, we saw everything from the occupancy drop, so 13% occupancy drop since the beginning of the pandemic, all the way to ultimately 43% of the deaths having occurred in senior care. And so this was something where we decided we really needed to focus on some solutions that would really focus on the safety of residents and caregivers within a facility. And the goal here is that ultimately, coming out of COVID, transparency into the processes that people are taking and the steps that people are taking to make their communities safe, that transparency is going to be super important. Family members are going to want to see that. Residents are going to want to see that. And this is something that we're starting to put even more focus on from our standpoint. So before I dive into specific examples, we always like to do a little education. So I'm going to do an intro to machine vision and what machine vision ultimately looks like in use. So the idea of machine vision is ultimately this idea that a computer with ultimately a camera attached is able to understand what it sees. And you're able to train it to understand certain scenarios. So the example that I'm going to give is cats and dogs. So if you have a child and you're trying to teach them the difference between a cat and a dog, how do you go about that process? So number one is you show them maybe pictures, or in real life, you show them, all right, this is a cat and this is a dog. And so they see that animal and they start to pick up on identifiers that are unique to each one. So the cat has pointy ears and big whiskers. The dog, open mouth, big black nose. These are, and if those are the only things I know, then I assume every cat and every dog looks this way. So if I want to get better at delineating between the two, I put more samples in. And so I say, all right, here's a lot more cats and a lot more dogs. And I ultimately would let the child know, this is a cat, this is a dog, this is a cat, this is a dog. And every one they learn better and better and better. Well, machine vision works the same way. So if I put this in front of a machine, I'm putting a picture through, I'm telling it what that is, with the hope that the more examples I put through, the better and better it gets at identification. And so what that looks like is you get a certainty index. And so this percentage above each of these pictures is ultimately how certain the computer is of what it's seeing. And so we have 99.96% cat. We have 100% dog. I'm not sure what's going on with the Basset Hound and why he's only 75%. But he looks like he's sad about it anyway. But the more and more you put through, the more and more the computer understands what it sees. So one of the examples that you may have seen here is this whole idea of autonomous vehicles. And so an autonomous vehicle has to understand everything in front of it, everything around it. So this is an example of identifying people, cars, trucks, traffic lights, all the things that it has to understand as it's trying to safely navigate you through a situation. So as we think about how this technology would ultimately be used in senior care, this is actually a startup that we work with called Safely You, and their focus is on using machine vision to identify falls. And it's much more than just the identification itself. So the way this works is right now they're focusing on memory care residents. A camera is placed within the living space. They get sign off from the resident or the resident's family. But ultimately what this allows them to do is that camera has been trained to understand what a fall looks like. What does it look like when someone is on the floor? And so that camera is ultimately always watching what's going on in that room. And unlike maybe a traditional security system, there's no live view into the room that somebody can just bring up. There's not a live feed to some back office or anything else. The computer is the only thing paying attention to this. And if the computer doesn't see a fall, it just gets rid of that footage. Nothing's happening in the room. I don't need to worry about it, but I'm going to keep an eye out. As soon as it identifies a fall, now what it does is it says, all right, I'm going to start capturing information. And what it will do is it will actually preemptively capture a few minutes ahead of the event and a few minutes behind the event, which are ultimately configurable, community by community. But what this allows us to do is a couple different things. One, it allows us to get visibility into a problem that we've never really had visibility into before. So if you think about it from a clinician standpoint, most of the time, most falls are unwitnessed. Most of the time, they're going to walk into a room and find someone on the floor. They have no information about what happened, how that resident ended up on the floor. Did that resident injure themselves? Did they hit their head? Did something else happen? So all of a sudden, we have information about that event. We can take care of the resident. We can send notification that this event has occurred. We can make sure the resident is taken care of, but then we can go back and see what truly happened. So we can say, hey, this resident actually let themselves down to the floor because they were trying to scoot across the floor and get to the television or get to a book on the other side of the room. We can see whether or not there was an injury. So did this person hit their head or did they just go down on their butt? And what we can do is we can ultimately say, well, how do we prevent the next fall from happening? So it's very hard to prevent the first fall. But the more we know about what happens and the likelihood for this specific resident, the more we can put in place to prevent that next fall from happening. So maybe it's a walking aid wasn't nearby the bed where it should have been. Or maybe there was a piece of furniture in the middle of the room that was a tripping hazard that should be actually moved elsewhere. So really, after the event, we can get all of these insights and we can truly start to impact falls within that community and truly resident by resident specific information. And so what we've seen for this is, anywhere from a 40% reduction in falls, a 70% reduction in emergency room visits. So knowing whether or not they need to send that person out. And obviously during times of COVID, if we don't have to send that resident out of the building, even better. And things like a 20% reduction in claims. So if you think about just the insurance and the liability associated with this, being able to reduce that because we can show what actually happened and we can show that we took the appropriate steps, we responded accordingly, and we're putting the steps in place to make sure this event doesn't happen again. So awesome tech. The startup behind this are doing it for the right reasons, truly understand the problem set. And they've, their folks have seen something, thousands and thousands of falls. So we're working with them to help design even things like what does a better room look like? What does a better layout look like? And what are some of those aids that are really impactful? Another technology is this whole idea of safety at the entryways. So as COVID came out, we immediately saw that we needed to start screening people that were coming in the door. And I'll say the immediate first response was nobody's coming in. We're basically going to lock down and only allow our own staff in. But you still had people like third-party contractors or electricians that needed to come in. And so this whole idea of how can we use some technology to make sure that we're doing what we can to make sure we're not bringing an infection into the building. And so this was something that these are ultimately the technology behind this is it's really a tablet that's tied to a thermal camera. And you can get a very accurate estimation of internal body temperature just by someone walking up and having their temperature taken. And so this technology actually came out of Asia because if you think about it, over the past few years, Asia has had to deal with SARS and neurovirus and everything else, and all of these things that haven't necessarily been a big deal in the US, but all of a sudden COVID put focus there. And so this was something that we could outfit and put at the entry for a building. We could tie it into building access systems and stuff like that. We could also have a record of that person coming into the building. So if we're looking at contact tracing or things like that, we can say, yep, this person came in at this time, their temperature was good. If their temperature was not passing, well, we turn them away and we say, maybe come back later when you're, take a few days, come back later when you feel better. But this is something where, there was a very manual mechanism that was put in place at a lot of the communities that are out there to do this type of work early on. So we had probably, some clinical staff member or maybe it was just a staff member in general, set up at a desk at the front door, hitting people with the infrared thermometer, writing down all that information, ultimately all that information on paper going into some file somewhere, where if they ever had to go back and find something, kind of good luck. And this allowed us to digitize all that information and remove that person from kind of harm's way of being that first level of response within a building. And so, this is something that we've seen a lot of out there, and we continue to see interest in even this technology used in different ways. Safety in the environment itself. So this is one that we were actually looking at a couple of years ago. And this is, so ultimately the technology here is needlepoint bipolar ionization. And it's taken me several opportunities of giving presentations to nail that in the first try. But this is one where, we were looking at, as we learned more and more about COVID-19, we learned that the aerosolization was the true problem that we needed to solve. It wasn't the people coming home from the grocery stores and not wiping down their cereal box because there was COVID on the surface. It was, people in groups and this aerosolized component being easily brought into the respiratory system. And so what this system does is ultimately it goes into your existing HVAC system. It's releasing this flow of positive and negative ions within the space. And what those ions do is they ultimately are like a magnet. They're attracted to foreign matter. And that could be dust. That could be all the way to odor molecules. Or in this case, it could be virus floating within the air. And so what happens is these positive and negative ions are ultimately attracted to those particles. And for SARS-CoV-2, it actually starts to inactivate the virus in air, to the point that we've seen about a 99.4% inactivation rate over the course of 30 minutes. And so this is one where there's all sorts of ways to focus on cleaning the air. You can put different filters in place. You can use UV lighting. You can use ionization. And there's an added effect to all of these. The nice thing about ionization is it's constantly in the air around you. So actually, this office that I'm in, we installed this throughout all of our offices. And unlike UV light that only impacts direct line of sight, the ionization, it flows through the air all around. And so it's always working, it's always acting. And as we think about the not just SARS-CoV-2 and not just COVID-19, but we think about things like seasonal flu, and we think about things, other airborne pathogens that have been historical issues within buildings, this is actually an approach that we can take that not only solves for the immediate need, but also solves for problems that we've had historically and just haven't had a great solution for. So this is one that we're really kind of excited about. At the same time, we're also just looking at how do we measure that indoor air quality. And so, I'm working on a project right now, which is, again, I can tell someone that I put something in the HVAC system that's going to make the air cleaner for them and make everything healthier. But how do I show them? And so from that transparency angle, this ability to actually put some measurement devices within the space and get a dashboard that shows me the state of air quality within that building. The stuff on the top, I will tell you, is a screenshot that I grabbed from another location. This is not from our building, luckily. But the screenshot on the bottom is actually from an installation that we have in this building. So, we're able to look at all of these different things and at a given point in time say, yep, our air quality is good, or nope, there's things that we actually need to go address. And something like this at the front door or something like this on one of those digital signage screens within the community can really give that transparency into what's happening and give that sense of safety to residents, caregivers, everybody else who's passing through those doors. So that's kind of some of the stuff that came out specifically really in the last 9 months. So what's coming next? Obviously, nothing as sexy as a toilet in a presentation. But one of the things that we're looking at is this whole idea of wastewater epidemiology. And this idea that if we can tell that there's an infection within a space, how would we actually respond differently? And so you think about the whole smart building piece, right, of having more information about the power usage and the lighting and everything else. Well, what if we had the ability to see the shed RNA of a particular virus in the wastewater pipes of a building? And not just know if it's there, but start to get information about how many people internal to the building probably have this, or how mature in its life cycle was that virus when it was shed. And so we're looking at all sorts of things that allow us to get a better insight into the health and safety of the people within the building that is completely passive. And so it's not a change in behavior that they have to have or anything else, but this is information that we can gather that will allow us to respond in a more timely manner. And if there is an infection within the building, help shut that down as quickly as possible. So some of that is in wastewater pipes. We're working with some startups that it's all the way to the toilet. So this is one where, as Gaurie talked about, how thinking about how building design changes over time. Do we need power outlet by the toilets now? Do we need to worry about Wi-Fi coverage in the bathrooms? Because that's how information is flowing from some of these systems. These are some things to think about. As you're thinking about what the next generation of your own buildings may look like. And this is the kind of final one from my side, and it's really this idea of continued passive monitoring. And so, I'm assuming a lot of people have a wearable of some type that's, maybe it's just doing steps, maybe it's doing heart rate, maybe it's doing pulse oximetry. But the downside of these is they have to be charged and you have to wear them. And we know that within, congregate care, that's also the first thing that someone's going to try to take off. And so what are ways that we can actually passively monitor what's happening within the space? And so this is actually a startup out of Korea. This is a radar solution that ultimately this little device on the left side can go up on the ceiling or can go on a wall. And ultimately what it's doing is it's measuring the movement that happens within that space. And so at a macro level, I can know one person's in the room, two people in the room, something like that. At the micro level, I can start to understand, hey, there's someone in the room and I can actually see the rise and fall of their chest. And it's so precise that I can actually see like pulses on the carotid artery on the neck and other places and be able to start giving you information on what's happening within that space. And if you think about it from the standpoint of having this in place, I can now see consistent trends for what's happening within that space. So instead of a clinician coming in and maybe doing vital signs, a few times a day, several hours apart, I can actually get real-time trends on what's happening within that space. And I can know that someone's in bed, they're breathing well, their heart rate is fine. I'm going to let them sleep. They actually need that. Or, hey, their heart rate has spiked over the last 5 minutes. Let's actually go in and see what's going on. Maybe there's something that we need to get ahead of. And so this is technology that I think we're going to see, more and more common as we think about what the kind of, living area of the future may look like. So I'm going to hand this back to Gaurie, and she's going to talk about telehealth. And I think telehealth is a great example of something that was probably far out on the horizon at the beginning of this year for many people. And then with COVID hitting, all of a sudden it became an immediate need.
Yep. Thanks, Justin. And I don't know about you guys, but whenever I listen to Justin speak about all of the new technologies that are coming out there, I get really, really excited about it. And part of the reason that I find this so exciting is if you go back to those fundamentals that are driving change within our industry, some of these technologies are really a part of the solution, right? Creating buildings that allow us to actually take on some of the caregiving and the monitoring of residents so that they're able to live much more freely, and that the human connection, as we look at the demographics and how we're challenged with staffing, can be optimized to put people to people where we don't need them just doing monitoring and things that systems and technology can do. So very quickly, we're going to touch on remote connectivity and telehealth. We all know what it is. What I really wanted to talk about was the idea of how do we ensure that we really maximize the performance of telehealth within your communities. It's become a mainstay in many of us, and we anticipate that it will be. As we're looking at it, we have conversations with our operators very early on or what their strategy around telehealth is to ensure that the facility is set up to be successful for that. So for instance, if your notion of telehealth is that you're going to bring a cart and that telehealth event is going to happen at a residence at their bed, in their unit, what do you need within that community? You need to ensure that the lighting is very good so that the imagery that is shared is good. You need to make sure acoustics are good. Without a doubt, the connectivity and the bandwidth have to be really strong. You need to ensure that there's privacy, and you also need to make sure that you're managing for infection control. All of those things are tangential to making sure that telehealth works well. It's not the technology component. It's all of those pieces that make that technology work really well. And that's just one example of why we believe that you have to look at this very holistically, and it has to start with the operations because it also has to be balanced with the financial impact, right? We love the idea of telehealth and the connectivity to DS Smart, the ability to really very quickly and remotely collect vitals much faster and much more accurately. Without that, and optimize your staff intervention, we think is really important. So as you have conversations about where technology and innovation can help you, you really need to start looking at it from your particular lens and really focus on the value that technology can bring to what you do for your residents, right? And so not all connected devices are better. How do you make sure that it's suitable for you? You also have to look at the whole situation because technology that isn't adapted by your staff members or by the family members is probably not going to serve you well. It may be the best option out there, but if your staff is not brought on board, so a process to ensure that that solution, it takes on not only what the technology is, but also how it gets integrated is part of how you should just look at it. The other thing is usability, right? It's the idea of looking at the value that it's providing today and recognizing that you may not be able to go the whole way with the technology or use, but that it'll be incremental steps. So I think one of the things that from the examples that Justin shared with us is that some of these technologies not only really create value and safety for our residents, but have significant cost savings if done appropriately and if your staff and everyone is on board on it. So really focus on the usability and look at it from all the different lenses. The final part of incorporating technology is test. You have to get in front of your user groups quickly. You need to understand what's going to resonate. You need to get buy-in. Our Innovation Technology Center, as Justin said, is, it's a melting pot to bring operators to try out these new startups and really ensure that they are suitable for this industry. That's really what we're trying to do, and to make sure that these, whatever we bring to the table actually enhances what you do for your residents. So we've got about 10 minutes left. We'd love to talk about this more and more, but if you have any questions, we'd love to answer them for you.
Thank you for that awesome presentation. We did get a question, I believe is about Safely You specifically. It says, does the monitoring system impede on the resident's privacy, and does the resident's family or the resident provide authorization prior to the implementation?
Absolutely. So obviously, a camera within the space, privacy rights are a huge concern. And so every resident who's actually monitored by this system, there is sign off by the family or the resident themselves to authorize that. And really what we've seen, I think, from especially the family perspective, is they feel so much more comfortable at that point, because maybe they had a family member who had a history of falls and nobody could figure out how to solve it or what was actually happening. And they've actually moved their loved one into a facility that had this technology specifically to get those insights, and saw that they were able to reduce those falls over time. So, a lot of these technologies, there's conversations that have to happen around, what is that balance of privacy and risk and costs and everything else. But we're certainly paying attention to that as well, and we're certainly interested to know where, what things pique your interest and where your alarm bells go off when you start hearing about some of these things, so we can make sure that we're working through them as well.
Justin, to add to that, the last time we were doing a presentation similar to this, the CEO of Safely was talking to me about there's a fear that when there is a recording of a fall, that exposes all parties to liability and what happens, and there's documentation, right? But what he was saying was it actually helps the situation, because now there's an independent third party that was actually, it's not somebody's opinion, it's not somebody that is potentially having some cognitive issues describing what was happening. One of the examples he said was that a resident said they were on the floor for 4 hours. Well, it turned out they were on the floor for 4 minutes, right? So there really is, especially again, as long as the family members are bought into the fact that is there really are some significant advantages to all parties at all different levels.
Right. Yep. Absolutely.
Right. Another question: when is the right time to have these types of technology conversations around new buildings or remodels?
I can take that one. That conversation, when you sit down and you're thinking about a project and you're thinking, this is what we would like to do. Say you have an assisted living community and you're going to add memory care, and you're looking at your operations of that memory care. That is when the conversation about innovation and technology should be had, because I can guarantee you, maybe of all of the ideas that are thrown out, you may adapt 10 to 20% of the ideas that we put out there. But what it will do, as this conversation does, is it will tee you into kind of what's happening in the future, so that it's an opportunity to kind of shift how you do things and say, you know what, in 4 years, I might be prepared and ready to bring on this technology into my community. How do I set the stage now to get there? You can't do that retroactively. That has to be done in the early planning stage. So what we like to do is sit down with the operations team and say, okay, this is what we want to accomplish. Now let's look at how we can bring on any of the new innovations or plan for them into the future. It's a timeline, right? There's some quick hits and then there's some long lead items.
The only thing I would add to that is also just the piece that, I mean, you can start testing some of these things in the communities and facilities that you have today. And maybe it's not as easy as, building around something new, but you can start to understand what works and what doesn't, how it would change the way that your operating models are affected and things like that. And those are things that, if there's certain technologies that you're interested in, feel free to reach out to us and we can help you through both learnings that have been had so far, as well as, what a good pilot of some of this technology may actually look like. Because a lot of these startups, I mean, they are aching to get into buildings. But you have to make sure you have a process. Because what we've seen before is, oh, hey, we did a pilot with this technology. Oh, great. What was the outcome? It's like, oh, well, it didn't cause any issues, so it was probably pretty good. It's like, okay, well, that's probably not the valuable insights that we were trying to get. And so how do you actually make sure that you have the kind of right structure around these things to ensure that you're getting the value out that you want, as well as that good information is actually getting passed back to whoever that developer may be? I've had a couple of questions come in to me directly around specific solution names or company names. Ultimately, what I would say is shoot me an email. My email's right here on the screen. If there's stuff that you want to learn more about, and I can certainly provide some additional information.
One last question here. What should we look for when startups or other tech vendors come knocking at our door?
Yeah, there's a lot of things. I mean, the first one is, how well do they understand the problem? There's a lot of startups that have really solid ideas or really good technology, but they don't necessarily understand the specific problem that they're trying to solve, or they've developed something for acute and they don't understand that post-acute is a very different world. And so I think, that's one where having that conversation and understanding, all right, what is the problem that you're trying to solve? How much do you actually understand about this problem set? Two, I think it's understanding the return on this investment. So when we look at startups, we look at them through, 3 different lenses. And it's, do they reduce the cost of operating, and whether that's operating the physical plant or workflow efficiencies or things like that? Do they demonstrably improve resident outcomes? Or do they increase revenue through some value-added services or making you more attractive than your competitors and things like that? So, we're always looking at things through those lenses. And when we're talking to startups, like, those are the questions we're pushing them on. Of, if they have a technology that's, hey, for $1,000 a room, we can come in and solve this problem. Okay, great. What is the return on that $1,000? So are we going to see outcomes increase? Are we going to see a reduction in cost or liability or other things? And really pushing that value conversation, to the startups or other groups, and making sure that they've got a good answer.
I think the other part of having vendors come knocking on your door is to really understand the idea of, where is that, whatever that vendor is bringing to the table, where's that going to fit into your DNA, right? And because it could be really fantastic, but if it doesn't work for how you operate and who you operate in and what your staffing is, it's really not going to be helpful. In fact, it could actually be a huge cost increase because of inefficiencies or the investment you made and it's sitting there, or people are trying to go sideways to try to make it work within their system. So that's why when we started this, I talked about, really understanding who you are and what you are. So when that vendor comes to the table, you're actually from a place of saying, I need help in these kind of locations. These are the kind of systems that work for me. Not to say that you know everything that's going to happen, but you're coming at it from kind of an understanding of what your organization does. And I think that helps you navigate those vendor conversations a lot better.
Absolutely.
Well, That is all of the questions we have time for today. Thank you all for those great questions, and thank you, Justin and Gaurie, for your time today.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Thanks for joining, everybody.
Thank you for joining us.